Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you're well. It's Rabbi Akiva Males, and today is Wednesday. It is the 14th of February, and we're getting ready for Parshas Terumah. So we're going to look at something today. I saw a beautiful piece. It's a little lengthy, but we're going to read through it together. I saw a beautiful piece in the Be'er Yosef that we've quoted him in the past. The Be'er Yosef is Rabbi Yosef Salant. He lived in Yerushalayim. He in the 20th century, and he was a descendant of the great Rav Shmuel Salant, who had been a Rav in Yerushalayim for decades. So we've quoted him before in the last couple of years. After I became familiar with his Sfarim, I've every now and then had the opportunity to look at them and found such beautiful Divrei Torah. So I want to share with you today one of them that really enhanced my understanding of a beautiful medrash quoted by Rashi. So let's see this. Parshas Terumah begins the saga about the Mishkan. We know that the Mishkan occupies a lot of space in the Torah. There's Terumah, there's Tetzaveh, there's V'yakel, there's Pekudei. There's an incredible amount of information that the Torah devotes to the construction of the Mishkan. And sometimes a person may wonder, why? Why so much detail? Why so much information? Some of it seems repetitive. What is there? What is there in that that was so important? And we're going to see from this Be'er Yosef today, we're going to see a beautiful approach to that, as well as answering some other questions. So let's see. There's the pasuk that's talking about the actual body of the Mishkan. So we know that the Mishkan, if you looked at it, there are the kalim, there are the utensils that are in the Mishkan, the tabernacle. There are those yerios, there are the curtains or drapes that are surrounding it. I guess you might call that the outer fence or outer screen courtyard. And then the actual building that's in the center that has both the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim sections in it. So that actual Mishkan structure, the walls were made of planks, wooden planks. And they were also covered by tapestries and special curtains that were woven. So we're going to be discussing this morning the krashim. The krashim are the planks, beautiful planks that were made of atzei shitim. It's always translated as wood of acacia wood, but we'll see what else that might mean. So let's see. So we're on our page. We're on chapter 26. That's Perek Chavav, pasuk Tesvav 15. It says V'asisa es hakrashim la mishkan. You shall make planks for the Mishkan. That's what's going to be the actual structure of the building of the Mishkan is going to be these wooden planks. And they're made from atzei shitim. They're made from shitim wood. Again, that's always translated as acacia. I'm not sure why, but it's shitim wood, omdim. And it says they are upright. The planks stand upright, unlike if you may think of Lincoln logs and some kind of cabins where they're stacked horizontally. These planks of wood were going to be standing upright. And there was a whole system that the Torah describes as to how they're going to stand. So there's a whole socket, there's gold, there's silver sockets that are at the bottom that are going to hold them, and they're also at the top to keep them connected. And there's going to be bars in the middle that pass through special rings to make sure that they all cling to one another. But those are the krashim, those are the planks of wood. They're going to be covered by gold as well. So let's see Rashi. Rashi quotes a beautiful medrash, tells us, where does wood come from? The Jews are now in the wilderness. Anyone who's taken a tiyul, gone for a hike in the wilderness, knows you don't come upon wood. And it's not like there's a Home Depot there that you're going to buy this. So where did they get this wood from? So let's see. Rashi quotes a beautiful medrash. Vasisa sakrashem, haylo lomar vasisa kirashim. The Torah should have written, and that you should make this out of planks of wood. Why did it say hakirashim with a hay? That seems to imply, here, I put one down by your seat. That seems to imply that they were well known. So Rashi quoting the medrash says, everywhere else it doesn't use a hay. Why here, mahu hakirashim? Why here does it use this hay? Seems to be like pointing a finger at the wood, like the identifiable wood. So it says, the Torah is telling us that these planks are supposed to be made from the wood that was ready, and it was standing for this. In other words, there was some wood that had been designated for this purpose, and that wood is the wood that's supposed to be used for this. What does that mean? What wood was designated for this? Yaakov Avinu nata arazim b'Mitzrayim. Yaakov Avinu, he planted special cedar trees when he was in Egypt. When he first came down to Egypt, he planted them. We're going to see where Yaakov got those cedar trees from. There's another medrash today. There's a lot more to the story. So Yaakov planted special trees in Egypt when he arrives. Ukishemes, and when he died, before he died, he commands them, before you leave Egypt, cut down those trees that have been growing for over 200 years and make sure to bring those logs of wood with you when the Exodus finally occurs. And he told them, you should know that after the Exodus that will take place, God is going to order Bnei Israel. He's going to instruct us to build a Mishkan, a special tabernacle in the wilderness. And it's got to be made from Atzei Shittim, from Shittim wood. So make sure you're ready for this. If you don't prepare, you're not going to have wood. So I'm setting the stage. I'm planting. I brought saplings with me to Egypt. We'll soon see where those came from. I brought saplings with me to Egypt. I planted them in Egypt. I watered them. And they've been growing here for over 200 years. Before you leave, you think you had a busy night, that last night in Mitzrayim, it's going to get busier. You're going to cut down these trees, and you're going to bring them with you. Hushi said, Abavli v'piyut shalo, and this was the famous poet that one of the Babylonian Payatim, one of the ones who make the poems that showed up in davening that were said in Yotzros, this is what he's referring to when he says, Tasmata mizorazim, that God's voice flew to the planting of the quick ones, Koros batenu arazim, and the cedar beams of our houses. What does that mean? Is that they were prepared. They were quick. They followed the instructions, and they were prepared with the wood that had been designated, prepared for this purpose to build the Mishkan. So it's a beautiful medrash. He's quoting from the medrash Tanchuma that Rashi is quoting, that Yaakov Avinu, before, when he comes down to Mitzrayim, he brought special saplings, and he plants them there, and he instructs Bnei Israel that when you leave, you've got to bring them with you because there's a Mishkan that's going to be built. Now, the Ber Yosef is going to be working with this medrash quoted by Rashi, but he's also going to be working with this very cryptic Gemara. So on the bottom of page 1, we're going to take a look at a very cryptic, a very puzzling line in the Gemara. The Gemara says, remember our pasuk says, Atzei Shitim Omdim, that they've got to be Shitim wood and they've got to be upright. They've got to be standing vertically. They're not going to be laying horizontal like a Lincoln log cabin. They're going to be standing vertical, these planks of wood for the Mishkan. So the Gemara darshans, it has several ways to understand in a very homiletic way to understand what is the Torah getting at when it says omdim, that they've got to be standing. So let's see one of them here. Amar Rav Chama bar Rav Chanina, my dechsiv atzei shitim omrim. What is the Torah getting at? Why did Hashem say that these atzei shitim, these shitim wood, they have to be standing? What is the Torah getting at? What's it hinting to? So it gives a couple explanations. We're going to focus on one. Davar acher, omdim. What does the Torah mean when it says omdim? Omdim means standing, but omdim also means still existing. Shema Tomar, maybe Jews in the future, when they're reading the Torah and they're reading about the Mishkan, maybe they will say, Avad Sivran, their promise is gone, it's been lost. Ubatal Sichuyan, and their hope has vanished. Talmud Lomar Omdim. Therefore, the Torah says about the Atzei Shitim, which is emblematic or representative of all the Mishkan, it's omdim, it's lasting. What does that mean? It's standing. She'omdim la'olam u'la'olamim. It is everlasting. It still exists. We don't know where it is. It was stowed away. Our tradition has it that it was stowed underneath the Temple Mount. But the Mishkan, when the Beis Hamikdash was built, was stowed away. That all the parts of it and the building of it, it was stowed away. So the Gemara is saying, some Jews in later generations might say that we were about to give up hope. We're never going to see the Mishkan again. Thousands of years has gone by. The Torah says that say shitim omdim, they still are lasting. They're everlasting. The components for the Mishkan were never destroyed and they didn't rot. They didn't decay. They're still there, and we'll see them again. Look at Rashi when he says ubatal sichuyan. We may have thought that their hope has vanished. That we yearn to see them. We yearn to see the Mishkan, the components of the Mishkan once again. We may have thought it's time to give up hope. No, the Torah says it is atzei shitim omdim. They are everlasting. Very cryptic Gemara. and we're going to see how Rav Yosef Salant, what he does with this. So let's turn the page to page 2. And we're going to look at, again, as I said, it's a little bit of a lengthy piece, but you're going to see it's not difficult. We'll go through it together. He starts by quoting our Gemara that we just saw in Yoma, that the Gemara in Yoma says, what did that say, Shitim Omdim mean? That you may have thought, Avad Savran, Avad Skuyan, that their promises vanished, their hope has disappeared. No, the Torah says Omdim Lolam Lolamim, that they're everlasting. And Rashi says that you may have thought Shematorim Mishnignazu, since they were put away, Avad Sivran, Shalo Yeshuvu Od. Maybe you would have thought that since they were stowed away, that we lost their promise. We're never going to see them again. They're never going to return. Ubatal Sichuyan, looks like I forgot to quote a Rashi on that first page. And also, Ubatal Sichuyan, what does it mean that you may have made the mistake of saying that their hope has vanished? Masha'anu Sochim Vitzofin Lam, that we're so anticipating seeing them once again. So that's the way Rashi's learning this. L'chora dvarim temuim. So Rabbi Salant writes, these words seem astonishing. Mashapirish Rashi al Divrei Torah. What Rashi is explaining sounds wild. Avad Sivran, what does it mean that their promise is gone? Shalo Yeshuvu Od, that they're not going to return again. Ubatal Sechuyan, that their hope has disappeared. Masharu Sochen Vitzofin, that we hope and that we yearn Vitzofin them and that we want to see him again. I was always familiar with the fact that we're davening every single day that the Beis Hamikdash should be rebuilt. Whoever heard of us davening that the Mishkan should return? We say every day when we end our Shmon Esrei, especially Yiratzon Sheibana Beis Hamikdash B'meira B'yameinu, we're always davening that the Beis Hamikdash should come back. Where do we ever see this idea that we're so hopeful that the Mishkan's going to return? What's the Gemara talking about? Excellent question. That we need a special haftacha, we need a special guarantee. Hashem has to tell us, I'd say Shitim Omdim, don't give up hope. You'll see the Mishkan again. Who is yearning to see the Mishkan? I know we're all davening to see the Beis Hamikdash. Who is yearning to see the Mishkan? Excellent question. So let's see what he does. Next paragraph. Ulam zachinu matzanu b'medrash Tanad Be'Eliyahu. He goes, I found an ancient medrash that can shed light on this Gemara. He says, Zelashono, he quotes, what's this medrash say? Why was the Mishkan? Why, when Shlomo Melech built the Beis Hamikdash, why did he stow away the Mishkan? And why is it important to Hashem that it's everlasting, that we will have it and that we'll see it again? Because the Ksherim, all the good people of the Jewish people who were alive at the time of the Midbar, they donated with their true hearts and true intentions out of the goodness of their hearts. They donated all the materials so the Mishkan should be built. And it's difficult for Hashem to let the efforts of ksherim, of good people, to let it go to waste. Hashem just can't let that be. Therefore, in the future, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, therefore, Yavo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God will come, v'yishra b'tocho k'mida rishona, and His presence will dwell in the Mishkan the same way that it did originally. So the Medrash Tanad Be'Eliyahu is saying that in the Messianic day, era, not only will the Beis Hamikdash be rebuilt, but it sounds like the Mishkan is going to be set up again. And not only is it going to be set up as a tourist attraction, but God's presence is going to reside in it as well. So we'll have almost like two locations. I don't know where it's going to be. Is it going to be a special plaza that's built for this in Yerushalayim somewhere? I don't know. I don't know where it's going to be. But according to this Medrash, in the time of Mashiach, not only are we going to have a Beis Hamikdash, we're also going to have the Mishkan. Again, I can't imagine it's going to function. There's not going to be a Mizbeach burning. That we will have a Beis Hamikdash for that. But we still will have a Mishkan where God's presence can be found. Ad Khan. Hinei Mefurash, it's straight out in this Medrash, Yotzei Pi Eliyahu Hanavi, because the Tanah Eliyahu is attributed to Eliyahu Hanavi. So Eliyahu Hanavi is telling us, that in the time of Mashiach, the Mishkan is coming back, and God's his presence will dwell there. Therefore, we do have to be hoping, and therefore we do have to be anticipating the arrival and the rebuilding of the Mishkan. And every living person will be able to witness God's presence in our midst. So there is something. Again, I don't know where it's going to be located, but Eliyahu Hanavi tells us in this Medrash that it's coming back. Aside from a Beis Hamikdash, we're also going to have a Mishkan, and God's presence will be found there. And that is what he's saying. How to explain the Gemara in Yoma? That's what our Torah is referring to as Atzei Shitim Omdim. They are still standing. Kedivrei Gemara means what? That they're everlasting. We should never give up hope. The Mishkan will come back. It has not rotted away. But we still need a good understanding. Why was it so important? Why did the Torah have to guarantee us that the Mishkan will be everlasting? If the Torah wants to tell us that the Mishkan will be everlasting, tell me about some other component of the Mishkan. Tell me about the tapestries, the curtains. Tell me about the Mizbeach. Why, when Hashem wants to let us know that it's everlasting, why does it specifically tie that to the krashim, to those standing beams made of shittim wood? Yoser Mishara Dvarim. Why does it, when it has to pick one component of the Mishkan to tell us will be everlasting, what is it about the krashim? What is it about the planks of wood that this is so tied to? Why didn't it tell us this about the tapestries, the curtains? Shein Ikra Mishkan. That was the covering, and the covering was very, very important. That's what everyone saw. Why did it tell us about the beautiful curtains that were hanging to separate the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim? These were all items that were essentials to make the Mishkan. It appears that all of them were squirreled away and hidden, put into storage when Shlomo built the Beis Hamikdash. It's not just the Krushim are going to return, but all the components of the Mishkan are going to return. So why does the Torah, when it has to tell us Omdim, that they're everlasting, why specifically about the Krushim? What's so special about the Krushim? Why did the Torah specifically pick the Krushim to tell us they will be back, that they are everlasting? So he says, here's how I could explain this. You find this in the Medrash. When Yaakov is on his way down to Egypt, he's just been told that Yosef is alive. He's on his way down to Egypt. He makes a special stop in Beersheba. And the Medrash there says, why did he stop in Beersheba? What did he do while he was there? Where did he go? Amar Rav Nachman. So there's different opinions. Rav Nachman says, halach lakutz arazim. He went to take saplings of cedar trees. Shenata Avram Zekeno beBeersheva. He went to go take, if he's got to bring, remember we said that he planted trees in Egypt? Well, where those trees come from? He brought saplings from Beersheba. What saplings? He didn't just go into the botanical garden. He went to Beersheba because that's where Avram Avinu, his Zaydi, that's where Avram had planted trees. Why did Avram plant trees? Because he set up an Eshel. Remember, Avram set up a place, it was a hospitality area. It was a rest stop for travelers where he would introduce them to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, give them to food, to drink, and a place to rest. And then he would introduce them to the idea that there's a Borei Olam, there's a creator, there's monotheism. That's where this was all taking place. That's so much chesed was going in. That's where Avram was sharing the idea of Hashem with the world. If he's got to bring trees to Egypt, I want those trees. That's what's going to grow into the mighty cedars, the shittim, that are going to become the wood for the Mishkan. That's where it's all based on. It's based on what Avram Avinu did. So he says as follows, that's what the pasuk says, Vayita Ishel beBeersheva. Where did Avraham plant trees? When he made an Eshel, when he made a hospitality center in Beersheva. The Torah writes that there was one big centered piece of wood in the middle of all the krashim. So it says, Amar of Levi, Habariach HaTichon, Lamed Beis Amma. It was 32 Ammas, 32 cubits. Where did they find a log that was that long? They brought this massive cedar tree. When they were leaving Egypt, they brought this massive cedar tree that Yaakov had planted, that had started off as one of the plant saplings that he had taken from Avram Avinu's tree preserve. So it says, that's what it says. That's what's going on. That's what the Medrash says, that when they left Egypt, they brought these trees with them, and that's what they used to make these planks. Amar Rav Levi, Mimigdal Tzivia Katsom, Mitzrayim. And Rav Levi had a different opinion that there was some big tower that they chopped it down when they brought it. But again, that's not what the Rav Levi's opinion was. Where did they get this wood? This is the wood that Yaakov brought with them, and it was taken from Avram Avinu's trees. Last two words. And he says that's also in the Medrash. We're now moving to page 3. Tanchuma. It's also in the Medrash Tanchuma in our parsha. Now this is what Rashi quoted. He says, "Meichan hayu krashim." Where did the Jewish people get these planks of wood from? They're in the midbar, in the wilderness. Yaakov vino natal sam b'shashir l'Mitzrayim. Yaakov planted these trees when he came down to Egypt. Amar levanav, he said to his sons, "Banai, asidin atem ligoel mikan." You are destined to go out of here. There will be an exodus. HaKadosh Baruch Hu asid lomar lechem mishatem nigalim, and God is destined to tell you after you've been redeemed, shetasu los hamishkan, to build a mishkan. Ela amdu v'natu arazim me'achshav. Therefore, I went ahead, and Yaakov says, when I'm first coming down to Egypt, he planted trees. Shebishashi yomer lechem lasos los hamishkan. So therefore, at the time when God tells you to build a mishkan, you arazim etukanim lakach. You'll have trees ready for this wood. Miyad amdu v'natu vasu kain. And therefore, as soon as he arrives in Egypt, the first thing he does is he makes his tree preserve over there. Ayin Shamod. Rashi quotes this. And that's where he gets to talking about with the Python, what the poet wrote. Fine. Okay. Putting this together now. Look at this. Uvechein. So Rav Salant writes as follows. Be'elu hakrashim me'atzei shitim. Look at these beams that were used to build the Mishkan. Look at their origins. They were made from the shittim wood. Hispalet biyoser tokef nedivos libam v'omet k'vurasam shaldor midbar. These beams personify the generosity of spirit and the honest to goodness, the godly nature of our ancestors who were alive in the Dor HaMidbar at the time of the Exodus. Shal Yisrael Saba Avian. And they also personify the pristine nature of their great-grandfather, of Yaakov Avinu and Avram Avinu. And specifically what these krashim specify, what they personify. That's why it makes sense why they should never decay, they should never fall apart. And why they should last forever. I never thought about this before. He says, think for a moment what this means Yaakov did and what else was going on in Yaakov's life on his way down to Egypt. What else was going on in Yaakov's life when he stopped in Beersheba? Think about this. Look at what was going on in his amazing heart and his pure soul. He was bereft of his beloved son Yosef for 22 years. He loved Yosef more than everybody else. Haben Zekunim Ashelo, the son of his old age, who he learned so much. Hu levado masaras kol chedre v'sodos ha-Torah shalom d'veshem v'ever. He passed along to Yosef all the Torah that he had learned in the yeshiva of Shem and Aver. And the whole 22 years that were separated, he cried and he mourned Allah. And he wouldn't accept any consolation. And he said that I'm going to go bereft to the grave. He has in parentheses, he also blamed himself. He said, maybe I'm responsible for getting him killed. The Medrash says he blamed himself for 22 years. He was tormented, self-affliction, saying, I'm responsible for my beloved son's death because I sent him on this mission to check on the brothers. I sent him to a dangerous place. It was Shazu. And what just happened at that moment? Shuatsuv, he was so sad. Vidoig, and he was so nervous. Gamal Shimon Beno. He also was so nervous about Shimon because he thought Shimon was enslaved in jail now in Egypt. He didn't know what his future is. About Binyamin, and he was now also nervous about Binyamin. Mahmad Nafsho, who he beloved of his soul. Shalachul Mitzrayim. He was taken down to prove that they were all brothers. So Shimon will get out of jail. So he's bereft of Yosef, his most beloved child. Shimon, who he also loves, is in jail. Binyamin, who's all he's got left from Rachel. He doesn't know what's going to be with him. Yaakov is a mess. He's an emotional mess. Uke'es. And right then and there, he suddenly was given this news flash. Ki od Yosef chai. Yosef's alive. He's a ruler. He's in charge in Egypt. v'yafeg libo, and his heart skips a beat. Nisalav, Ramban says it means he fainted. Mitoch simcha v'gil, because he's so happy and ecstatic. Excuse me. And when he finally sees the wagons that have been sent, Asher Shalach Yosef al Bibaro, that Yosef sent based on Paro's instructions. Uvishamoes bakashes Yosef, and Yosef made a request. She's Darez Lavoilav that he should hurry to get down there. V'lo yachos al don't worry about your belongings. Kadesh lo yisakev, so therefore you won't tarry. Eli Yamar b'chol avshar, hurry here as quick as you can. As so your trip down to Egypt should be hasty. And get here as fast as you can. So he's ecstatic. He's relieved. He was panicked about Yosef for 22 years. He finds out he's alive. He was in a mess about Shimon. He finds out he's alive. Binyamin, he's safe and alive. Yosef not only is alive, he's a provider. He's a ruler. He's happy. There's nothing he wants more than to get there as fast, ASAP, as soon as possible. Actually, take a Vamar, and what does he do? He said he decides El Chavarenu Termamus. I gotta go see him before I die. We took because he's ecstatic out of the love that he has for his beloved son. Especially because he's also been informed that he's still a tzaddik, despite being away out of his wholesome environment for 22 years. He has remained attached to all of his morals and his belief in Hashem. And as much haste as he has, pushing him to get down to Egypt as fast as he can. All the emotional pull to go to Yosef. Rather than take the direct route, get on the highway, get to Egypt as fast as possible, and to minimize the time and the trip as much as possible, to get there faster. What did he do? He took a circuitous route. He took a longer route than necessary. As excited as he is, what does Yaakov do? He goes to Beersheba first stop. From there, he goes to this tower of Tzivia, and he goes to chop down all the tall, mighty trees that are there. And he goes and he wants to, despite all the great weight, now he's bringing these trees. He wants to bring them down to Egypt. Even though this really stretched out his trip, Pikama by a measurable amount, and it delayed his meeting with Yosef. Whose heart wants nothing more than to be reunited with. He suppressed the love that he was feeling in his heart, all of his emotions, because he saw through divine inspiration. He had a prophetic vision that when they have the Exodus, they're going to need to make a Mishkan out of Shittim wood. And they need to have it ready to go. Is there anything that can be used to measure what kind of a spiritual giant Yaakov was? More, how pure he was, how he was willing to suppress all the feelings of love he had, and the strong desire that's burning like fire in this patriarch of Israel. Why is he suppressing all this? Because he wants to have ready to go all the Atzei Shitim. Levanav Achar Zman Meruba Lakamas Mishkan. Look at the love. As much as his personal love is there for Yosef, what does he want more? To make sure Bnei Yisrael is ready to build a Mishkan. Is there anything that could demonstrate what kind of a spiritual giant Yaakov was more than this wood? And at the same token, you know what? We could also decipher from this wood what kind of giants our ancestors were at the moment they left Egypt. Because what did they do when they left Egypt? They took the time to go wood shopping. There's nothing they wanted to do more than get out of there. Look what it says. Look at what the spiritual level of our ancestors were when they left Egypt. They were already instructed by Moshe that they got to ask their neighbors for all the gold and silver. And God made a miracle that the Egyptians, they were favoring the Jews and they gave them everything. The Gemara says, they were giving it up against their will. Some say it was against the will of Israel. Because it was so heavy already. They're going off into this wilderness. There's no food, there's no water. There's not a place that anything's growing. I don't want to carry. I don't want such a heavy suitcase. I'm going to have all this loot. So according to the opinion of the Gemara, they didn't want this. It was too heavy. And that's what Yirmiyahu says. Al davar zeh misham chamanavi. Navi says, that he says, I remember the kindness you showed to follow me into a wilderness, a place where nothing grows. We're on page 4 now. The gam libam haya, and what was in their hearts at that time? Adayin male pachad v'daigami paro. They were still terrified of Paro. Mitzrayim 10 years before Achareim. Maybe they're going to chase us down. Or maybe we'll be attacked by the nations around us. That's why they took weapons. That they went out armed. The Targum says it means they went out armed. That's another reason why the Jews didn't necessarily want to take the gold and silver. We got a huge trip. Money is great, but we got to carry all this. Well, who's got the strength for this? Rather, against their will, the Egyptians did this and gave them the stuff because God commanded them to. Now they're already bogged down with all the stuff they didn't want to carry. What else are they going to carry now? Now they got to start schlepping these trees, cut them down and schlepp them. Paro and his crew, they wake up in the middle of the night to kick the Jews out. They said, get out of here. We don't want you anymore. And they're hurrying, they're pushing, they're saying, get out of here. And the Jews take out their dough before it even has a chance to rise. They were chased out. They didn't have any time to tarry. And they didn't have time to make any food. And with incredible amount of haste, they left Egypt. So how astonishing is that once you factor that all in, at that very moment, they didn't have time to make a sandwich. But they're going to a wilderness where there's nothing growing. They don't have time to make a sandwich, but what are they willing to do? They're going to take out their axes and hatchets. We got work to do before we leave Egypt. We have a forest to cut down. These incredibly large, heavy trees have to be chopped down. We need to take them because there's a Mishkan that's going to have to be built. And that's what Yaakov told us. Lisadram al habehemos. They got to set them up on all their animals. They're going out with all their donkeys and whatnot. So you got to start schlepping all this wood. So not only are they going with all their belongings, not only going with all the stuff they didn't want to carry, they don't even have time to make food, but we got to start chopping down trees and schlepping them. And they never complain. It doesn't matter to them, all this weight that we're going to have to schlep now. Because they had such belief and trust in Hashem, and they had hope, and they had belief. But Savas Yaakov Avim, with what Yaakov had commanded them, that these cedar trees, I'd say Shittim, are the Shittim wood, Yulem Tzorach Kedei Lasos Mishkan. This is what we're going to need to build a Mishkan. Look how great the trust, the belief of the Bnei Yisrael and the merits that they have. When they carried out all of the wood and everything from Egypt. So now that we know all this, and now we think about these two incredible tests. The first test is what Yaakov passed. On his way down to Egypt, the last thing he wanted to do was go wood collecting, but that's what he did. Yosef. He wants to be reunited with Yosef. And he subdued all that love that he had for Yosef in order to go cut down those trees and then to shlap them and then plant them in Egypt. And then they also represent the challenge that the Jewish people faced when they were leaving Egypt. That they took them and they schlepped them, imam with them, Azal Midbar to the wilderness. Asher Avinu Yaakov uvanav shneim nasnu libam v'nafsha aleim. What do these would represent? How our great Zaydi, Yaakov, and our ancestors, how they were willing to put aside their own personal care and concern, because there's nothing that was more important to them than fulfilling God's word. Yaakov knows that there's a Mishkan that's have to be built. He was given that premonition, that nevuah. I've got to do what it takes. I'll put my personal agenda on hold. The Jewish people, there was nothing they wanted to do more than get out of Egypt, to get out of there, at least pack a lunch. They put all their personal aspirations and desires on hold because we've got instructions. Our instructions are to do God's will. These shittim wood, this wood represents us subduing our own hopes, our own aspirations, because there's nothing more important to our ancestors than fulfilling the Ratzon Hashem, God's will. Uvekoach ma'aseim, and therefore the strength of their actions, top of the column on the left, that, so to say, gave spirit. The power of the Jewish spirit was imbued into that wood. Therefore, it makes sense why it's that wood that needs to last forever, because of the zechusim, the merits that they entail. And that's why it makes sense for God's presence to rest in the presence of that wood. But the Mishkan, the wooden planks in the Mishkan were only used while they were in the Midbar, because even when they went into Israel to Shiloh, for those 300 some odd years that the Mishkan stood in Shiloh, they built it out of stone there, so they were put away in storage. It was the only time that they were used was until Mishkan Shiloh was built. I had a theory once that they when Shiloh got destroyed, they rebuilt the Mishkan then in Nov, and I think in Givon and Nov, I think were the next two places before the Beis Hamikdash was rebuilt. I just assumed that meant that they used the wood again, but he seems to be saying no, that no, it was put away as soon as they built the Mishkan Shiloh. Okay, so let's say so it says Ulam Kiv.
You said it was put away, but I thought it was put away in the Beis Hamikdash.
Correct, but I'm saying, but when they went into Israel, the Mishkan's not built for close to the Beis Hamikdash is not built for close to 1,000 years, because there's the Mishkan Shiloh stood for over I think it was like 369 years or something in Shiloh, but even before Shiloh, Yeshua established it, I think in Gilgal was first. I forgot all the places where it was. But the only time that the wooden planks were used was all those years in the Midbar and until Mishkan Shiloh was built. Because when Mishkan Shiloh was built, they built the walls out of stone at that point. They still used the urios, the curtains and the tapestries and everything.
I wondered because we were there.
Yeah, in Shiloh.
And it looks like stone.
Well, that's just a shul that was built to represent it. But I'm saying, but the actual Mishkan in Shiloh was built out of stone walls. And tapestry over on top of it and everything like that. Okay, but he seems to be learning after Shiloh was destroyed, they didn't go back to the wood. They continued using the stone. Okay, so he says, Ulam kivan mishkan lo iskayim rak bizman she'Yisrael b'midbar b'meshach harbim shana. The only time they used the wooden Mishkan was while they were in the wilderness. Nimsa sharak bizman hakatzer hazeh shamshu b'kedushasam hazos. It was just during that small period of time that they were able to use that wood that was infused with all that sanctity. Lios Mishkan u'mikdash l'shchina. But once they went into Israel, again, I think that means after Shiloh was built. Once they stopped using those atzei shitim, those wooden planks, so then the Jews become a little bit despondent. They become a little depressed, saying all that spiritual power that was infused into that wood, because look at the Mesiras Nefesh, how the self-sacrifice that Yaakov used in bringing that wood down to Egypt, and that Bnei Yisrael used in bringing it out of Egypt. They thought it's gone. L'chein ba'a kosav al zeh kavana lomar v'asisas hakroshim behei hayediyah used a hay. Those well-known wood, that's what you should use. That's what the Gemara is explaining. Shema Tomar Avad Savram, Avad Ubatal Zechuyam, even if you think that all hope is lost and the promise of that wood is gone, don't worry about it. It's coming back. So we were wondering, where is this ever, what is it about this wood? What does that mean? And what is that? Again, he had two questions. Where did we ever see anything that the Mishkan will be rebuilt? We always talk about the Beis Hamikdash being rebuilt. Where's anything about the Mishkan being rebuilt? And also, if you have to tell me that parts of the Mishkan are going to be everlasting, why did it choose the Torah choose to put that on the wooden planks? Tell me about some other aspect of the Mishkan. So he says, so what does the Gemara mean when it says that we should never give up hope and we should never give up the promise of the Mishkan? Hainu Sekuyav Shal Yaakov. Don't give up the hope and the promise of Yaakov Avinu. Shesacha Baruch HaKodesh, that he saw with divine inspiration. Shemehem Yatsu HaMishkan, that from this wood the Mishkan would be built. V'nasa nafsho alei, and then he put his heart and soul into it. Vavad Savran, and don't ever lose the promise and hope. Shal Yisrael Asher Gam Heim Nasnu Nafsham. They also acted with a tremendous self-sacrifice. B'kochum Nasam V'tchonam, with their faith and their trust, their belief in Hashem. Lotziam Lakachtam Iman B'tzeisam Mitzrayim. To the last thing they want to do at the Exodus is now start chopping down trees and schlepping them. But they said, we're going to do it. Talmud Lomar, that's why the Torah says, Omdim, they're everlasting, they're still standing. What does that mean? She'omdim ladu omei olamim. They're going to always be here. And that's again gets what that Medrash tells us. In the future, what's going to happen? God's going to show up. The Mishkan will be rebuilt, and He will dwell in it as He originally did. Again, I don't know where that will be. Is it going to be somewhere right next to Harabais? I don't know. Because the Mishkan was built by kosher people, by good, straight, upright people, with generosity of their hearts. It's very difficult for God just to let the good work, a generous work of kosher people, just go to waste and fall apart. This means in the future, the Mishkan will return. It will be set up once again, and it will return to us in the future. And God's presence will reside in it, like it did originally. That's what the Medrash says in the name of Eliyahu Navi. It's not just these beams that are going to return. These beams personify the spirit that the Jewish people had at the time the Mishkan was built, because these beams tell us about the nature of Yaakov, because he, on his way down to Mitzrayim, where he wanted nothing more to be reunited with Yosef, he stopped to get these trees, to these saplings, and to cut down wood from there. And they also tell us about Bnei Yisrael, when they wanted nothing more than to leave Egypt, they stopped to get these trees and to schlep them with them. They gave their heart and soul for this wood. Now we're on the last page, on page 5. We're at the end of this. That's what it says. God wants, when the Mishkan is being built, anyone who's willing to be generous of heart. Anyone whose heart carries them. Anyone whose spirit is generous. Every donation for the Mishkan was given with generous heart and generous spirit of the Jewish people. And this is personified by no element greater than this wood. That's why they're going to be everlasting. They'll never decay. They'll never deteriorate. And in the future, therefore, in the future, they will be set up once again, and they will be a house for God's presence. And that's why we need to have hope, and we need to have the promise that as soon as possible the Beis Hamikdash will be rebuilt, and along with that, not only will the Beis Hamikdash be rebuilt, but the Mishkan will come back. God's presence will reside not only in the Beis Hamikdash, but also in the Mishkan, speedily in our days. Zeo perish Rashi b'Gemara. That's what Rashi's getting at when Rashi says, Shanu sochen v'tzopim lahem, that we're hoping, we anticipate, and we're looking forward to it. And now, once we've explained all this, this also answers why does the Torah spend so much time talking about this Mishkan? Because it goes over in so many parshas every detail of the Mishkan. Parshas Terumah v'Tetzava v'Chelek Parshas Kisisa, and then there's Parshas Vayakel and Pekudei. Hey, Binyan HaMishkan, they all are revolving around this Mishkan. Very rarely does God spend time in the Torah going into such detail about any other mitzvah which are apply for all time. Ulam, however, now that we saw that medrash, that Tana de Be'eliyahu, that the Mishkan is going, it still exists. It was stowed away, but it still exists. And it'll be reestablished one day in the messianic future, and God's presence will reside in it once again. And not just in the body of the Mishkan, but in all the kelim, every aspect that went into its construction. Now we understand why the Torah spent so much time on it. It's giving us all this detail to make us want to know it and understand it better, to anticipate it, and to hope for its return. We want to see it. That means the Mishkan is very different than all the Batei Mikdash. It's different than number 1 and number 2. When the first one was destroyed, they just built the second Beis Hamikdash. When the first Beis Hamikdash was nullified, they didn't build the second Beis Hamikdash from the remains of the first one. They used all new wood, silver, gold. It was all new material. And similarly, the third Beis Hamikdash, that God willing will be built, that should be rebuilt speedily in our days. Yered mina shamayim. It's supposed to descend from heaven. Mikdash shalesh, a fiery mikdash coming down from Shemayim. It's not going to be using the materials from the first 1 and 2. We never have any concept anywhere that number 1 and number 2 are going to return, or even their materials going to return. Ulam, nonetheless, however, in contrast, Hamishkan yuchzar lanu ba'osam advarim atzmam. The Mishkan, the original Mishkan, built by Moshe and Betzalel, is going to return. Hakrashim, the wooden beams that have their origin with Yaakov, really originating with Avram. Vayirios, all the curtains, Vadanim, all the sockets. They were made, but they were stowed away. Yuchzeru kulam kemo shehayu. They're all going to return. That's why the Torah goes into such good detail on them. Because they're everlasting, and God willing, we're going to see them again soon. I thought this was a very, very beautiful piece. Is that in so many ways? Number one, it gives us, an idea of something I never heard of before. Who ever heard of this idea that the Mishkan is going to return? I thought, okay, it was stowed away. So God willing, in Messianic times, we'll see it, and maybe we'll build it. We'll have it'll be a museum piece of what we once had. But it sounds like that, no, God's presence is going to rest there again. Why? Because you can't take out of it. There was such spiritual power that was infused into the Mishkan that can never be taken out. And God willing, it's going to be returned. And what element of the Mishkan is most representative of the spiritual power that was infused into it by our holy and our saintly ancestors? Those Krushim. Because those Krushim, those wooden beams, look at their origin story. They start with Avram Avinu planting them with Chesed. Yaakov, he sublimates all of his passions to go be reunited with his son in order to go get those logs, cut them down, or to get saplings, however we're going to understand that. And he puts his personal agenda on the side, thinking about what's God's will. And then he plants them for over 200 years. They grow in Egypt, and the Jewish people, when they want nothing more at Yetzias Mitzrayim than to just leave Egypt, we don't want more to schlep. They're not even schlepping sandwiches. They say, no, we're not leaving before we chop them down, because that's what Yaakov told us. And our own personal aspirations are put on the side to fulfill the Ratzon Hashem. There's nothing that personifies that message about the Mishkan more than the Krushim. Therefore, when the Gemara has to tell us that the Mishkan is everlasting, what element of the Mishkan does it pick to tell us that about? Specifically about those Krushim. Absolutely fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And then at the end, how we use this also to wrap up. Why does the Torah go into so much detail on the Mishkan? Now this might make a little more sense because this wasn't a one-time occurrence. This is something that still exists today. It's squirreled away, it's stowed away, but it still exists and it's going to be rebuilt. That's what he says, Eliyahu Navi taught us. Absolutely fascinating. I thought this was such an interesting piece and never heard this material before. And that's what I wanted to
The
share.
third one is gonna come down in fire. Then you have to have, I mean, that sounds kind of spiritual.
Yeah, it sounds like, again, there's different opinions. I think Rambam's opinion, Maimonides was a an uber rationalist. And I think Rambam's opinion is that in Messianic age is the world's not going to change. It's not going to be suddenly governed by open miracles. We're going to still have to go to work. We're going to still, do everything in the natural order of business. However, the nations of the world aren't going to be against us anymore, and we'll be able to put all of our attention and focus on Avodas Hashem, not have to worry about self-defense, not have to put the budgetary needs into our armies and everything like that, and we can just focus on doing what we need to do. That's how Rambam learns. Just about everybody, I shouldn't say everyone else, the non-hyper rationalist camp say no, there's big miracles coming, and that third base Hamikdash is supposed to descend. It's going to be in a blaze of glory descending from heaven. Probably that blaze will clear out all the rubble that's that's there. The structures that have been built over the years on the Temple Mount, that's going to clear all that out, and this heavenly structure is going to take its place. That's what a lot of midrashim refer to. But again, that's a dispute between Rambam and many others about what to expect in the Messianic age. Should we expect a time of just a different world filled with completely open miracles, or should we expect a world that runs in the natural order of things, but we're just not going to have to deal with anti-Semitism and Jew hatred anymore? Rambam's opinion is much less magical than others that are out there. I'll still take it. I'll still take it. But just to understand that point. You know what? Let me just stop the recording and let me open it up if to any questions that anyone has. Let me just hit the stop any questions or comments. Just give me 1 second. The computer's kind of frozen on us there. Stop recording.